I have the pleasure of being joined by Paris Butler, or as you might know him, Bald Omni-Man. He has had a channel that has spiked in popularity, giving a lot of good programming insight and training insight, and filling the void that is created by empty YouTube content. So he's part of the uprising. I like to think of it that way, anyways. Providing very much a service to people. So Paris, just go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about yourself, what your training history is, and what you're doing these days.
So first and foremost, thank you for the kind words. I'm kind of a person where I don't know how to take compliments, but I do appreciate them. They just make me feel weird. I don't know. But in terms of me, a lot of people that are watching this might recognize me just from, quite honestly, YouTube comment section. That's kind of how I started to get followers at first till I got to 1,000. It sucks that you kind of have to do that on YouTube to get followers at first because you don't get recommended until after 1,000. So a lot of y'all probably know me from just like the different funny things I would say under people's comment sections. In terms of my training history, that's an interesting topic just because I've tried and tasted and touched a bunch of different things. So my earliest training history, I would say, revolved mostly around like long distance running, a lot of calisthenics, a lot of, I guess you could say prisoner type workouts like push-ups, inverted rows, pull-ups, body weight squats, all done in like a circuit. I think the longest distance run that I've ever done was around 19 or so at the time. It was like 15 miles. And I don't know if that's like really like actually good, but for me, it was good considering I also used to be really obese. I think when I was 15, I weighed like almost 300 pounds and I was like 6 inches shorter. So, for me, that was pretty good. But then I started to transition just naturally into like weight training, not very good weight training. Wasn't periodized well. I didn't really know what I was doing. And then over time, just accruing knowledge in the weight training sphere. I've tried different strongman type things, powerlifting, bodybuilding, CrossFit. I think my general interest in just developing my body and trying different things has put me in a really unique position as a coach to be able to help people with a lot of different things and speak generally in terms of how to organize training for like I said, like bodybuilding, CrossFit, so on. In fact, you talked to my buddy Sam yesterday. We're getting him ready for a strongman competition. So it's a lot of fun. I'm a savant. I could sit and talk about it for hours. I will if you sit here and let me. So
That's cool, man. And I relate to that. About the comment thing, that's funny because that is my first association with you. And I think a lot of other people experience this. It's like Pavlov's dog. We just post a video and we expect to see the Omni-Man logo in the bottom. In fact, I don't know what your strategies were or if it's something you had all your notifications up or what, but I was like, man, I don't know if I could be first in the comments this often if I tried, but you're absolutely right. Like to put your name out there, you got a handful of tactics and it's hard to get over that first hump, to get your first bit of recognition. It's not enough to be good. It's not even enough to have good production quality. Like you do have to kind of go out there and pound the pavement. But I got a lot of respect for people that do that. Sam actually brought that up. He's like, it's not enough to be good. It's like you kind of have an obligation to expose yourself to other people or make other people aware of you. You kind of have an obligation to frame things in a way people can understand. So that's all part of that like overall hustle. Like if you have something to say, it's like there's that, but then also you got to get people to hear it. But I mean, good for you for the ethic. I mean, to do what needs to be done to grow the channel, because a lot of people I think either get that meteoric rise out of the gates or they just meander for like 10 years until they accidentally pick up a certain threshold of followers. I want to talk a bit more about your background, because the interesting thing to me is all the people I talk to, what my first impression is of like who they are as athletes or coaches, and then to talk to them, see what their background really is. So you have Sam, for example, who him and his brother are like teenage phenoms. Like Sam's 23 with like an 800-pound pull, and his brother's 19 and is about to hit a 2,000-pound total. But then on the other hand, you get people that may have had a more indirect route. I call it fat adjacent, but I'm still like kind of on the softer side. I always have to put in the comments like, good thing this isn't an aesthetics channel, because that's not my lean, obviously. But as far as aesthetics go, like I would have pegged you for somebody who was like naturally a hard gainer, naturally very low body fat, just looking at you because you're very cut, you're very grainy, and usually, not all the time, but usually you associate that with somebody who always kind of had low body fat and then just kind of filled out that body type. So I'm surprised. I'm surprised to hear that you were overweight. About what age did you kind of make that transition? And then out of that transition, like what kind of goals emerged for you? Like what are the important aspects of training that you ended up focusing on?
That's an interesting question. So, thankfully, at the moment where I decided I wanted to start losing weight, I was also at an age where like I just had a growth spurt. So I grew like 6 inches over the summer.
Yeah, that helps.
For sure. It helped like mitigate a lot of the loose skin that I otherwise would have had. Like I was like 5'5" or something before my growth spurt. I'm 5'11" now. Um, in terms of specific goals, I didn't really have any. I guess I could say my biggest thing and what helps me keep interest with my training is that I sort of just keep my goals open ended with whatever I happen to be interested in at the time. And that's not as lackadaisical as it sounds. I give myself a certain amount of specific goals per year, but I also give myself the flexibility to like, hey, like if I've accomplished what I've set out to do this year, maybe I want to try front squats this year and reach a certain threshold in that, or overhead press or whatever the case may be. So when I was younger, it kind of just was that same thing, but I guess you could say on a smaller scale. So, in school, if you could do 50 push-ups, you were a stud. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to get to the point where I can do 80. Okay, I did 80. Okay, let me try bench pressing now. Okay, if you bench 225 in high school, you're a stud. I got it for 10 reps, So it's kind of both, an open-ended kind of deal, but also something that's like ever ascending. So once I accomplish something, I'm always looking to where that could go laterally or where I could compound upon something that I just was doing. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. I remember for me, because I was overweight through middle school. Similarly, I hit a growth spurt going into high school, and I leaned out a little bit naturally, but that was in conjunction with sports, which I'd never played before. But I remember this kind of aha moment because I was very sedentary, had never played a sport, was the opposite of physically active. And then at like 13 or 14, I'm like, I have to play football or like, I'm just not going to make it. It's like, I have to do something to get a social life and to take control. And if I can do anything, I should just leap in. And there was this kind of aha moment. And I can kind of pin everything I've done since then on that one moment. Like if it didn't go that way, it was ever going to go that way. Did you have like a similar moment where you would reach a threshold where you're like, something's got to change and I'm the only one that's going to do it?
Absolutely. So it was actually during gym class, I think. It was during gym class because they had like a yearly like physical fitness test where you had to run like a mile around like a field, do push-ups, sit-ups, and then something else. It was like a military type fitness test almost. And just seeing how badly I did compared to everybody, even like the girls, I'm like, dude, this is pathetic. Like I can do a lot better than this because in my mind, it's the interesting thing with that. A lot of people that are overweight, a lot of times have, like a reduced sense of self-confidence or sense of self. I never viewed myself that way. I never overstepped. Like, I didn't think I was better than anybody, but I didn't look at myself as any better or worse than anyone else. So I had an air of self-confidence about myself. I mean, just saying objectively how much worse I did compared to everybody. I'm like, dude, I got to change this. I can change this. So I remember I had a weight set that my cousin actually like gave to me and my dad to work out with. We never used it. It was in our basement. And I'm like, man, I'm going to come down here. I'm going to start like bench pressing because that's like the only exercise that I knew. That turned into, whatever resembled a squat at that age. I'd work my legs out a little bit. We had like 205 pounds. And I told myself over time, like, yeah, I'm going to get to the point where I can just rep this out, So that moment of clarity was definitely seeing how unphysically fit I really was. And you never really know till you compare yourself to others, which is the interesting thing.
That's true. And your psychology is kind of interesting too, because I think we oversimplify this psychological dynamic that goes into people who perform versus don't, or people who are, let's say, overweight or not. And the self-esteem thing, I think, can be real when you're routinely faced with it, through bullying or rejection or whatever it might be. But it's interesting. You had kind of an underlying confidence, but it seems kind of connected to the type of confidence you need to be good in the first place. Like, it's a confidence that high performers would have. You just had to be faced with the fact that, oh, I'm not doing enough. And then you just adjusted your target, and then all of a sudden you cut loose. I remember if I think back too, I would say a very inflated sense of self-esteem when I was younger. I don't know. How old are you?
27.
27. All right. So you're on the younger side. Everybody's young to me, but you probably don't feel young. You get in the late 20s and that's when everything starts to catch up with you. But I just reminisce about like early mid 90s when I was becoming aware of the self-esteem movement. And I remember having the people come in and lecture all the kids, and they had the analogies about self-esteem. It wasn't just that they wanted kids to have high self-esteem. They wanted you to be aware of it and to kind of actually focus on your own self-esteem and tell yourself these good stories. And then they're taking, scoring out of kids' sports games and on and on and on. But I remember having kind of an inflated sense of self-esteem when I was younger. And I think it was something similar along the same lines. I was like, I should be doing better. It wasn't like I can't. It wasn't like I'm hamstrung. It wasn't like it's not my fault. It's X, Y, and Z. It was like, I should be doing better. Why am I not doing better? Can you kind of pinpoint anything you think from your childhood or upbringing as kind of a form of troubleshooting that kind of led to being overweight that you think might, I don't know, give insight into other people or the obesity epidemic at large? Like, what do you kind of credit to that disparity early on?
That's a multifaceted answer I can give as well. It's just a lot of different factors, just between the types of the types of media that we consume. Like, I grew up watching like Dragon Ball Z and He-Man and Hercules and stuff. So that example of someone being physically fit was always there. And then on top of that, my father always instilled like a sense of, you're the man, you're a bright kid, you're very talented, and anything you try to do, you just have to put your mind to it. Having the right tools to not be obese when that's like your default was kind of the tricky part. So just like you did right now when we tried to get the recording thing to work with Zoom, guys, we were struggling to get that shit working, but I got to Google, I started searching different things. I'm like, okay, literally, like, what is a calorie? Okay, what's fat? What's protein? What's carbs? And then, like, how do you lose weight? And then for me, it was just very mathematical. I'm a very logical person. So I'm like, I don't know honestly what I eat in a day. I just know I eat when I'm bored. And a lot of the times it's something like super calorie dense, because the calorie dense shit is really tasty. So it just started with just honestly simple stuff. And the simple answer usually is the correct one, but isn't the most useful for people a lot of the time because they know the simple answer. It's really the implementation of it that's more of like a mindset piece, where I never really had the mindset issue. I just didn't know what I was doing. Cutting out foods, not eating when I was bored, tracking what I'm doing. You can't manage what you don't track. And then just time overall. And what I found is just implementing things and being consistent. Losing weight or gaining it never was really hard. It's interesting that you said you pegged me as like a hard gainer. I had, just from my lifestyle, stayed pretty lean. I walk around a lot. I train pretty often with a lot of volume, so I stay pretty lean. But if I want to like gain weight, preferentially, if I'm bulking or something, I'm bulking now. But if I wanted to like giggle bulk and get up to like 40 more pounds from where I'm at now, I can do that very methodically, and then lose it very methodically as well.
No, that's awesome to be able to have that element of control. And the reason I pegged it, it's really because that element of control is rare. Usually when you see somebody It's like there's this huge valley between most people who are kind of recreational, even people that take physique and training very seriously, but then the pros, like there's this huge valley in between that. So when I see somebody such as yourself that has, and I've known a lot of these guys, same type of guy that can just look at a weight and blow up, or myself, I get big, I get strong very easily. I have the opposite issues where I was going through wrestling, I was going through 2-a-days, and I've always had a layer of fat. It didn't matter what point in my life I was. I had fasted, I'd starved myself, I'd done all the wrong things. But if I'm equating everything that me and my friends did, I just stayed a little bit fatter given all of the other things being the same. So it's just something you focus on, you adjust. You have to titrate everything towards yourself. But especially hearing that you used to be overweight, I mean, that suggests a huge amount of control, a huge shift given your kind of predisposition. That's very rare. So I think that speaks volumes about, it's not just being good, it's that you were able to turn that ship around to the degree. Because for those who haven't seen the videos, like I've seen the Christmas tree, I've seen the lat spread, I've seen like you're very lean and you're very muscular given how lean you are. And that's very rare for people that don't have a lot of years in like aesthetic bodybuilding. As far as coaching right now, because you do coach, right?
Yes.
You have a client base. You feel like it's given you some insight into why people fail or struggle with weight loss or struggle with their goals, given the trials and tribulations that you've had? Like, to what degree do you have to kind of approach them differently based on how their mindset tends to be, or what like the general mindset tends to be with weight loss?
That's an interesting question as well. So the general mindset with weight loss, unfortunately, is that if you do the right thing, you should instantly obtain the results that you're looking for. So because we're in a calorie deficit for a week or two, that should instantaneously manifest as like some significant difference in your physique. A big part of, success with clients and lifters, because I have both, people who are just trained for holistic purposes, people who train more competitively, and then like the recreational guys. But no matter what the case is, if they're looking to lose weight and there's someone that traditionally finds that they have trouble with that, they're looking for either an answer or a piece of objectivity to kind of compare their, mental biases with. Even me, like, over the course of me bulking the past 6 or 7 months, I can look at different parts of my physique where like, okay, I'm not as lean as I used to be. And then people outside looking in, they're like, you're not any less lean than you were, you're just bigger. So with that being said, you have to take what I'm, considering in my own mind and just apply it to someone that, is 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight. They just need a bit of objectivity, I find, and then just reassurance. I'm not a drill sergeant or anything like that. There's almost always usually an accountability piece, like, cut the bullshit. You're not losing weight because you're not eating in a deficit. And here's how we're going to do that. Here's how you can track that. And here's how we're going to stay accountable. There's always that conversation, but giving them that first piece of reassurance always sets them up for success, I've found. And I think that's my strength because, like I said, I've been really obese too. So I know exactly what that looks like. I know exactly what losing a lot of weight looks like, and I know how to do it sustainably. So
I've experienced something very similar, having gone through kind of the physical transformation through my teen years, but then starting out with, most of the years I spent coaching, I was 19, 20, 21 at like LA Fitness, right? So you get all of the sedentary accountants and the middle-aged housewives and the people that have let themselves go and want to turn it around, or maybe have some substantial struggles that they're dealing with. And I think the reassurance is big. I don't think I would have gotten anywhere if I didn't have something that looked like support, even behind all the actual drill sergeant type shit you get in like football or high school sports, whatever. But I think a lot of people think like, oh, in the name of cutting the bullshit, you have to be like aggressive and in people's face, and you have to set this hard line, almost like an overreaction to society that tends to be a little more on the enabling side. And it does have to be a balance, because you have to be good at setting the boundary and saying, this is where the buck stops, but also, keeping track of where their investment is, where their emotional state is. It takes a long time to rewire these deeply embedded habits. And you do need to like carry it along. You need some training wheels for a little while before they're self-sufficient. The thing that I find, so with society at large, there's like these movements going on now, and it gets a little extreme, but you get like, okay, the fat positivity movement, right? You get people that have already an incentive to sell themselves a certain story, but then they have the means now to attach themselves to something that repeats back what they want to hear. And that is one of the biggest obstacles I think I found with people. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm doing the wrong things and now I need to get back into the gym and be held accountable. But I've come across some people with some deeply embedded beliefs about fat loss that aren't rooted in reality. For instance, I know a guy who is probably 320 pounds, probably 35 to 40% body fat, insisted that he couldn't lose weight because he had a hormonal imbalance. And there's a guy I knew in person. And it was just post after post after post talking about how the doctors didn't know what they were talking about. They were telling him it was calories. They were telling him it was this. And he's like, no, I've tried all that. And there's like this layer of resistance. Like you said, they need a dose of objectivity. But there's this layer of resistance a lot of people engage with where if they can tell themselves the thing that takes their responsibility out of the equation, they'll go with that, even to the point where it's almost toxic. And the reality is it's like your body is not a perpetual motion machine. It doesn't manifest energy out of nowhere. It might be different for you than somebody else, but as long as you're getting into a calorie deficit and doing the right things, then you'll get the right answer. And whether or not you're getting it is a sign of whether or not you've been doing the right thing. So it becomes very, very simple equation. Have you encountered that very much? Or do you find that most of the people you train tend to be pretty responsive once they just get in touch with somebody who's supportive and knowledgeable?
Most of the time. I can think of one or two instances where, a situation like the one you described arises where they swear it's their period, or, that's pretty common with women actually, that it's their period that's making them gain weight, or that it's their whatever that lies outside of their personal accountability that's making them gain weight. Something outside of their control is making them gain 7 pounds in a week for 3 weeks. You know what I mean? So I think, so how I approach these specific situations is always with whatever level of, communication I have with that person as per our rapport. So the way I communicate with one person might not look the same as how I communicate with another, just because, like you said, there's different levels to it. It's always, my answer is my answer, and it's not going to change. Like you said, if you put 2 and 2 into a calculator, 4 is going to come out no matter, what functions you put in the middle. If 2 and 2 are here and there's an equal sign, it's going to add up to 4. So, barring things like extreme thyroid issues, which you would know if you have that. You're going to lose weight if you eat in a deficit. You're going to lose weight if you increase your activity. The answer doesn't change just because it's not, you're not making it work. You need to just make it work.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's what it becomes, the extra dimension of coaching that a lot of people I don't think really understand or appreciate until they get into it. Because a lot of it, of course, you have to know the mechanics. You got to know how to play chess if you want to be good at chess, but you also have to know how to psych out your opponent. And I almost view it as kind of combative when I'm dealing with a client, because there is this element of trying to understand their psychology, work around them, to the point, certain people that are new, you almost have to trick them into doing hard work. But then eventually the habits get instilled and you see that kind of become part of who they are, which is very rewarding. You brought this up before we started. You had mentioned the video that I had put up regarding, it was kind of loosely regarding masculinity and test levels, but considering what we just kind of talked about, given starting out as being overweight, which you and I both relate to, the types of changes that went on during that transformation, and then how you see yourself as not just an adult capable male, but as somebody who kind of represents masculinity. Give me some of your thoughts on that topic. Like what state do you see kind of masculinity at large as being in the world right now? Is it something that you think is overblown? Is it something you think there's not enough of? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's interesting, just because that can change depending upon which group of people you're talking to or talking about. Just in general, I think that it's definitely in to be, a masculine male. With however that looks, it's going to look different for everybody. But just generically, how I like to define that as someone that has, conviction and a set of beliefs or virtues that they have, no matter what those may be. For some people, they don't take drugs. Some people, it's their religion, whatever. Um, an ability to, not only conduct yourself in a way that is representative of your virtues, but be able to lead others as well. I think that those are all qualities that definitely, are just intrinsic to basic human survival. Like, society can't function without those traits. There has to be leaders. There has to be capable individuals that are capable of showing others how to be great as well. I think that the way that it's expressed sometimes is kind of where it starts to be a topic of contention. There's the whole toxic masculinity thing. I don't think that any trait that people describe as toxic masculinity is inherently toxic if that person just honestly isn't a piece of shit. Like, I don't think that there's inherently anything wrong with being a dominating force in anything that you're doing, because you need to be dominant to be the best at shit. It just is what it is. There's nothing wrong with being a little, you know, cutthroat, in that you're mainly motivated by the success of not only your endeavors, but those that are important to you. I don't think that there's anything wrong with helping people find out what their strengths and weaknesses are and utilizing them. It's just there are certain people that utilize these very masculine traits in a way that, just is kind of sociopathic. And I think that's something that some groups of people kind of use to just take, like a closed off look at masculinity and say, this is what this is, and this is wrong, and this is how you have to be. And that's where it's kind of like, no, all people don't express these traits that way, you know?
That's a very interesting point right there, because that's something I've thought about quite a bit just in terms of basic politics and philosophy. It's how you as an individual view groups and the gestalt you get about what describes a group and what traits are there, especially being on the outside and looking in. There's always this game you have to play when you're trying to assign a quality to a group, where you notice a trend or a pattern, and based on how present it is or how obvious it is, you decide, is that a main feature of the group or is it not? And people are wildly inconsistent with what that threshold is, depending on if it's something they support or if it's something they're trying to disparage, So, you can take that with just take the trope of, some Klan member in the South or whatever, and, pre Jim Crow or something, and their perspective of somebody who's, let's say, a minority or somebody who's gay, they're going to have a stereotype in their mind or maybe some bad experience. And that's going to be, as far as I'm concerned, that's what these people are. And that's one extreme. Or on the other hand, if people are, let's say in the same way, like being ethnocentrics, really supporting their own group identity, then it's like, oh, well, those negative things that you experience about us, like that's the fringe, that's the extreme. That's not all of us. We're all these good things. Let me tell you about that. And with the toxic masculinity thing, I think that's really valid, because it's like, how for one, how do you define masculinity? That's a hard enough thing by itself, because I agree with everything you said about the traits, but those are traits you can apply to everybody, male and female. And then my brain wants to go to a place where, well, are we talking about these being kind of exclusive to men and women, or are these kind of masculine and feminine traits that everybody can kind of share, and these tend to be more masculine? I think of the character-driven stuff as being extremely important. Leadership is extremely important. And I see those as being things that are kind of built off of the type of, I don't know, aggression that you would associate with men, because you do have to have thick skin and you have to be assertive and aggressive to be able to live and compete and kind of fight and scrounge. And that fits in very differently with a lot of people's view, I think, of how the world should be. But then you end up like imagining these exotic futures that don't even fit like who we are biologically. You know what I mean? It's like, well, in the future, if we didn't experience anger and jealousy and tribalism or whatever, yeah, then we could do X, Y, and Z and it would be really neat and comfortable. But in the meantime, this is how we're built. So to what degree are we going to do that? I remember, I think it was a Jordan Peterson interview we did with Kathy Newman. I mean, he was going through the steps of talking about, well, men do better in the workplace because we're more aggressive, we're more, masculine, we ask for raises, we're more competitive. And then the response was like, well, isn't that a sign in and of itself of inequality, that those traits shouldn't have to be required for you to perform? And then you're in this weird spiral where you're like, wait, is it optional to be competitive if you want to get ahead? Is that just an arbitrary feature of our society? Or should we actually be trying to like eliminate that? How would you eliminate that? And you get into a really, really weird headspace.
It's an interesting rabbit hole that you can go down just because, like you said, it's like a million and one different. Okay, well, if this is the case, then what about this? Okay, if that happens, what is it? It's like I try when I give people advice in terms of like how to, improve their character or find themselves to avoid going down that rabbit hole because you always will be able to if you really want to. Center yourself in what's going on with you. Are you the best person that you can be? And that's like you alluded to, male or female. Any man or woman could possess traits of leadership, dominance, kindness, conviction. Are you a person that possesses those traits outside of like anyone else's influence? If that's the case, then you're doing a good job. And then once you're, developed enough from a character perspective, that's when you can start to reach out and try to, I guess you could say, influence others to also be the best versions of themselves that they can be. I think a lot of people try to, for lack of a better term, be an influencer or an influence before they actually like know who they are. That's where you end up with like a lot of channels or platforms where it's like fast food fitness or fast food accounting or fast food, whatever the hell they do, because they don't know who they are and it's evident in their content because it's soulless.
That is absolutely true. And I talked a little bit, or I'd made some passing remarks about kind of vapid influencer content. And I started gearing up for a channel many years ago. I knew I wanted to work for myself. I didn't know how. And I went through all the online courses and it gets sold out there. Like, oh, you want to work in your living room? Do this, this, and this. And it starts with find a niche, be an expert, give information, wash, rinse, repeat, and then eventually you get successful. And people start with that instead of starting with the principal thing, which is like, get some experience, not just in your profession, but in the real world. Know what your mission statement is, know what your morals are, or what have you, for better, for worse, at least have something pinned down, even if it's not ideal. I think that has absolutely lent to, fast food. That's a great analogy to what you see a lot of. It is recycled, repurposed, regurgitated information that anybody can take and spit back out to anybody else, but it lacks the context, lacks the consistency, doesn't paint a cohesive principle-based worldview that you can very easily use to kind of pivot and make other choices in. And that was actually going to be one of the questions I have, because I'm interested for all the up and coming YouTube people, because it's not just the experience you have as a lifter, which obviously you have a ton. You have to like play this YouTube game and you have to involve yourself with other channels, and you have to do research, and you have to see what the field of play is to really try to get out and dominate it. So I'm interested what your view is of kind of the industry at large, the type of fitness content or lifting content that gets put out. Like, what's your general sense of it, and what specific problems do you think it's suffering from right now?
A lot. It is kind of something where you have to appreciate the climate of what it is for what it is and just accept it and play by the rules and then influence them where you can. So by that, well, for me specifically, people like seeing certain types of content. I'm always thinking of a way how I can present that in a non-cookie cutter way, or in a way that is, charismatic or personable. I think that's my big thing, is that like I take a lot of training concepts and, whatever principles that people need to know to be successful long term with their training, and I try to describe them in like not fun way, but you know, when you're in school, you have a teacher that's a good teacher and a teacher that's a bad teacher. The bad teacher uses like the bunch of textbook terms that no one cares about, no one understands. And then there's the teacher that makes things, you know, understandable by most people. I try to avoid using, you know, the most biomechanically correct words or, you know, the most textbook words that I can when I talk about training principles. And then I have like my goofy type videos as well, where it's, you know, more lighthearted and goofy. And then part of it actually is a little bit where the influencing part comes into play because people are going to look up to you. It is what it is, especially if you have a strong personality. I kind of just make things trendy that are with my audience anyway. I make things trendy that are just generally good for them anyway. So at first it was like Larson press and then seal rows. I made those cool to do. Everybody started doing those. And then it was like upright rows and now it's front squats. Not manipulating them, but like because they trust me and I know that they trust me, I'm gonna make them think that like their meat and potatoes is like the coolest, like chattiest shit that they've ever seen in their life. And then they're gonna enjoy doing it. So I try not to take YouTube too seriously in terms of like I have to upload 5.4 videos or my algorithm is going to go down. I'm like, no, dude, I'm going to stay consistent. I'm going to engage with my community. I'm going to make them feel special because I do think every person has the ability to be special. The only special people that aren't special are like those who think that they aren't, you know, everybody's good at something. Like I said, just being consistent, you know. I don't try to make too many YouTube shorts because I don't like those because you can't put music over them longer than 15 seconds, which I think is shit. Probably to the detriment of my channel just because I know that those get a lot of engagement versus regular videos. But I like maintaining the integrity of my content more than I necessarily like following trends because I don't do either of those things. You know, I don't follow trends at all.
Yeah. And that I think in a roundabout way ends up working as an advantage because I am noticing a theme. If I take you and Jeffrey Verity Schofield and I take Sam Sheether, like part of what stands out is how non-conformist your thumbnails are. Like just from a purely like SEO or analytical perspective, if I'm trying to get a handle on like how you present your brand and how it speaks to your audience, Jeff is notorious for having, I mean, they look like they were made on paint in Windows 98. And it's great, but you know what he's talking about. It captures the eye. It at least stands out just because it's different. And his audience, he's grown fantastically well. His audience has come to expect it. Sam just does the, I don't even know what the name is because I'm too goddamn old. But he does like the crying, like 4chan memes or whatever.
Oh yeah, the soy jack face. Yeah,
that what it is. The soy jack. It was killing me. I'm like, I see this everywhere. I know there's a name for it. I just don't know what it is. But it's all like just that, but like modified 100 different ways. And I think it's hilarious, and I think it's going to work for him. And then you'll just do like a lot of manga close-ups, right? Just
absolutely.
And they look cool and they stand out, and it pops up in the search because the thumbnail doesn't have anything to do with the search. So people find it based on the topic. It looks interesting, but then it gets ingrained as being part of your brand because you've unabashedly sold yourself in this kind of package where it's like, yeah, I like superheroes and manga, and I like these topics, and this all kind of goes into how I package and present everything. And that's very powerful. And it's unpretentious. And that's the thing I really like about it too. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not, and it doesn't pretend to package everything up, which allows you to not worry about all this other bullshit that doesn't have anything to do with promoting good information. And actually on that topic, because we've talked enough about the background stuff and YouTube and the algorithm and whatever, I want to get to the nuts and bolts of your actual training philosophy, because we've established you're strong, you're jacked, and you did so despite being kind of physically disadvantaged in that way growing up. And obviously your content speaks to a lot of people at this point. What are kind of your staple principles when it comes to training? And how do you like convey that to the people you have influence over?
That's a fun question to answer. So first and foremost, how I convey it is always it's somewhat purposeful on my part, but also just, you know, I am a person that is goofy, very talkative, charismatic, and I like get my point across that way. So I'll always package it somewhat in like a meme form or something that's like goofy, funny, easy to look at. But in terms of the nuts and bolts, I always try to take like key training principles and, like I said, explain them simply to people, and so that they can implement them simply over a long period of time for their entirety of their training career. So what that looks like specifically in terms of like different strategies that I use, that's going to look different depending upon the person's needs. But just generically, I like including movements that have a big range of motion. A lot of times the movement that you're best at, that you can lift the most amount of weight on, if you do it that way, it's not going to be conducive to like generally making you stronger, generally making you bigger. So like, for example, everybody likes to shit on sumo deadlifts. People who are really good at them, you're not going to get as jacked doing those as if you do like a stiff-legged deadlift or a conventional deadlift. It's just the facts. So including a lot of what I call like self-limiting variations, where you're taking things away to like make you, I guess, weaker in terms of load that you have on the bar, that increase your strength development, that increase the amount of hypertrophy that you get from sessions. So for me specifically, I could talk about my own training a little bit. I almost exclusively like Larson press and incline bench in terms of my pressing motions. I'm always doing some form of deep range of motion leg movement, a lot of times on a machine, just because if you're looking for hypertrophy, I find that first and foremost, like I said, range of motion is king most of the time. You know, for like leg motions, it's a no-brainer. So using the most amount of range of motion you can on a leg press or a hack squat, where you can push training volumes higher than you otherwise could. On top of the self-limiting variations, I think carryover to like a bigger movement is somewhat of a meme sometimes, because you exclude so many other valuable movements that have purpose in a training program other than to make your squat, bench, and deadlift bigger. A lot of times people pick accessories that they think have the most carryover, but they're really doing them in a way that isn't productive at all. So belt squats, for example, a lot of people do them to increase their squat or like, you know, get more quad hypertrophy. But then when you look at the way that they do them, their knee is almost like perpendicular to their shin. Like there's no forward knee travel. So you're not stretching your quad at all. You're just using your hips and your ass to lift the weight. There's no extra quad hypertrophy coming into play. So all that to say, some movements I pick just to increase like the quality of a movement pattern. For most people, you know, that are hip dominant on a squat, that looks like making them get good at front squats. You have no choice but to stay relatively upright. You have no choice but to push your knees over your toes if you don't want to dump the bar. So picking movements to increase your, you know, the quality of your movement patterns, self-limiting variations, and then just picking a few progression schemes and knowing how to implement them simply. Some of my favorites, I think I actually learned this from your channel a few years ago, actually, for like the accessory movement. So like back extensions, for example, I like doing an AMRAP and then doing like 2/3 or like half the amount of reps on the back downs, just to get a lot of good quality volume, and being able to drive like a strength stimulus on that top set. Since it's an AMRAP, it's the most amount of reps you can do. I really like using RPE. Percentage-based stuff is really good. Like I said, I could talk about the shit for hours. There's a lot of things I do, but those are kind of my staples.
So it sounds like exercise selection is a really big piece of all of that. Just almost as if you pick your movements well, then the rest seems to not be quite as important, or at least there's more play in the joints. I have been beating this drum for a little while when you were talking about range of motion with the movements. And it's one of the reasons I'm the biggest critic of sumo. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much I care about whether or not sumo is in powerlifting is like a 1.5 out of 10. And it's fun to talk shit every now and then just to you know, ruffle jimmies. But as a developmental movement, that's what bothers me, because I'll see people do it for no other reason than they see other people do it. when they have no powerlifting goals, no competitive goals. And a lot of the times they're thinner built, maybe they have longer legs or their hips accommodate that setup. It feels better. That's usually what I hear. It's like, well, it just feels better. I can lift more weight. It's like, well, that isn't necessarily a sign that that's going to be your best bet, especially if I think back to what it was like being new. Everything felt like shit. If I went by what felt good, I wouldn't squat. I remember when it used to feel like front squats were going to choke me out, right? It feels like shit until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, that means you've gotten better and stronger. So I think very similarly. I think in terms of how advantage or disadvantage you are, because the more disadvantage you are in a movement, the more of an adaptive result is going to take place. You know, your body doesn't have as reason to adapt. And I think I've also seen you make a point that when you are more kind of advantage into something, or when the range is shorter, when you're really suited towards a particular style, like you can go a little harder more often. A thread I've seen with some of the freak deadlifters, if you think about over the last 10 or 12 years of Instagram, the guys that seem to max out every week, that seem to pull with something that looks like shitty form and have these like really big deadlift to body weight ratios. A lot of the times I look at them and it's like, okay, you have like a +8 ape index, you know, the bar's locking out 2 inches above your kneecaps. You either have a short torso or your leverages allow you to start very upright with your hips open. And when you add all that up, the net result is like a less substantial training hit than if everything was in your wheelhouse and you were in this nice, tight little it's a less training stress than if you were disadvantaged. And if you had to have more closed joint angles and go through full range of motion and pick the bar up higher and on and on. A lot of people don't think about that when they're engaging in exercise selection, developmentally or competitively, because it has huge implications on how much frequency you can handle, what the RPE you can handle is going to be, you know, how often you can train at certain percentages. And that's a big one that goes over people's heads.
I blame that somewhat on just the way that Instagram is constructed. You know, we only ever see the highlights usually of like the top end competitors. A lot of them in the lighter weight classes pull sumo. It just is what it is. What you don't see is just some teenager watching them do that, is that most good sumo deadlifters that are at the top of their weight class, they either do some form of conventional deadlift or they do some form of pure hip hinge to develop the musculature needed to push their sumo deadlift to the threshold that they've had. Nobody, for the most part, is getting like an 800-pound sumo just by doing sumo deadlift. They're doing some other form of more disadvantaged training to develop themselves muscularly. Their off seasons aren't really powerlifting super specific all the time. It's a lot of bodybuilding, getting more jacked. And it's exactly like you said, how you have these skinny dudes with huge deadlift to body weight ratios that almost always hit a wall. And that's actually a big portion of like the type of lifter that reaches out to coaches online, actually, is just people who have done just enough of what they're good at to get to a certain level. And then they don't know what to do from there just because they don't know anything but, you know, do what I'm good at, you know?
Yeah.
It's an annoying meta that we're in almost. That's why like I'm trying to do a good job of like making the foundational stuff cool again. Like every so often I'll release like a new exercise and talk about it like it's the best thing ever, when really it's just something quite basic that works really well, that I'm just trying to make trendy so people can actually get jacked. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you forget when you've achieved a certain level of authority, you forget that it's new. What you take for granted is new to other people, and it constantly has to be repackaged. That's why, I mean, we could take a big leap. This is why I'm cynical about the future of the human race, because as long as we're not immortal, that means every 10, 20, 30 years, everybody's got to relearn the same bullshit, no matter how fundamental it is.
It's very cyclical.
It's cyclical to the point where we're quibbling. We're having to explain to people things that we think is self-evident because we already went through that process, whether it's basic, whether it's civil rights, or whether it's, you know, social agreements or whatever it is, no matter how fundamental it is. And that's just shit that people were arguing about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And that's kind of the thing. When when you want to take it to an ugly place, which is easy to do when you're surrounded by a lot of, bullshit written into neon signs that's just flashing super bright. You have to remember that this is going to be forever our task for as long as human beings are around. You have to be able to figure out how to address that problem so you can speak good foundational principle-based truth to people without having it devolve into just a war of like, well, that guy sucks, listen to me. So kind of a parallel to that, when I was talking to Sheether yesterday, we started talking about self-help books. And that was funny because
oh boy.
I know I'm a huge self-help buff, and we started talking about it. And that's not something you peg as, that's not something you usually lead with, because usually people have that raised eyebrow, like Tony Robbins and shit. Like, what are you, part of some like weird cult? Like, what is that? But we said something very similar. It was like, if you already have your shit together and you follow good principles throughout your life and you're successful, that's good for you, but other people may not know that. So when they come across that for the first time, even if it's in a really like kind of corny book, like for them, it's a light bulb moment. And training principles for new people is the same way. So presenting it to them that way is very intelligent.
Absolutely. And they're just most receptive to it that way. When it's not too pretentious, it's not too like overbearing. It's just like, hey, here's the benefits. Here's how this shit is really cool. You do it, you'll be really cool too. So you do front squats, you get big jack legs and a big upper back. It's the coolest shit ever. It isn't not cool, but like you said, it's self-evident to someone that understands that. It goes without saying that, you get big squat, you get big legs. But to someone who wants big legs and this new exercise to them, it's exciting to them. You always want to deliver it that way. It's like you said, you can be an asshole about it, but that's not conducive to getting people to listen to you, especially when like a lot of people on social media shoot themselves in the foot by like demonizing their target audience by referring to them as if they're subhuman just because they don't understand something. So it's like you got this guy that's super into your content, just so into your content. He asks you a question and it might seem like some stupid shit to you, like something super obvious, but he doesn't know that. He can't tell you what he doesn't know. I always try to remember that we were all, new at this at some point. We didn't know the obvious answer to something. I was fucking morbidly obese. You know what I'm saying? So just always remembering that we all started somewhere. I know enough now to know that I know nothing. There's some fucking guru of lifting. I'm sure they could teach me a whole lot. I encounter things that I don't know every day. So just remembering that we're all human. And like you said, if they find the shit in a self-help book, YouTube in a lot of ways is like a self-help book for people that like to talk shit about self-help books.
Mm-hmm.
Just get it how you live. However you find the information, I'm fine with that. As long as you implement it, you're consistent with it, and you're not an asshole yourself. I'm cool with however you found something out,
Yeah, totally. So tell these people where they can find you. If you have any other publications, platforms you want them to find your content on.
I am on YouTube, Bald Omni-Man, Instagram, also Bald Omni-Man. If you see me anywhere else, that's probably not me, because I think those are the only two that I use. Most active on Instagram and YouTube. Email, you can find it under the description of my videos. If you have any coaching inquiries or want to use like a free program or something, you can find that there usually.
Fantastic. Well, Paris, thank you for joining us today. This was great. We absolutely have to do this again. And I don't really like talking to new people, so I'm pretty sure we are going to do this again. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by today. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.